Beautiful gem there by Adoration 80 with Ethimboloy Olapapo. Moving on with interviews, let's taking a look at sports. Temperature has a significant impact on the performance of athletes. Now, high heat and humidity lead to two problems in the exercising body, such as increased core body temperature and dehydration. Now, increased body temperature, hypothermia, leads to decreased muscles endurance, which means the reduction in the muscle's ability to contract repeatedly or in a sustained manner over a long period of time. And with Namibia currently experiencing high temperatures, how does this current change of season affect the performance of athletes, and what are the tips they can take to do better with performing in this heat? Now, Munashe Chinyama, who is a sports physiotherapist, is currently joining us on Skype to answer these questions. Good morning, Mr. Chinyama, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me as well.
All right. How does the current change of the season affect the performance of athletes?
Yeah, so basically, I like the way you introduced it quite correctly that with an increase in temperature, there is hyperthermia that happens to the body. So obviously, our enzymes or muscles, they're working at optimal temperature, which is obviously the average around 37.5 degrees. But with what we're experiencing now, temperatures that are reaching 40, 38, there is a reduction in the efficiency with which muscles contract, and not only that, just like any other object, when there is heat, there is actually easier elasticity and stretchability of structures, including muscles. So you'd imagine when it's very hot, it's much easier to sustain an injury because the muscles are much more stretch prone, and as we run, as athletes perform, their muscle injuries are more prevalent in this kind of weather. Yes.
All right. So I guess that answers my next question as to heat being difficult for athletes.
Yes, so it goes on with so I wanted to distinguish it in terms of what it does to the physical structure of the muscle, which is what I described. But of course, in terms of the physiology as well, when you sweat, you remember in the sweat you've got your water as well as salts like your potassium and sodium. So when you sweat, that's all that you lose. But unfortunately, sometimes, or most of the times, our athletes only do replace the water by drinking water, and then not the what is it the salt as well that will be in the water. So physiologically, you end up with an ion imbalance because of the heat, in the sweating and the fluid loss. So that's sometimes something that's usually happening with our athletes, that you end up sustaining
Mr. Chinyama?
iron imbalance. Yes.
All right. I lost you for a second. Please continue.
Okay, no, I was just emphasizing on the point that physiologically, when you lose fluids through sweat, you lose water as well as salts. That is the components of the sweat, and the salts include sodium and
Yes.
potassium. But then most of our athletes, when they are replenishing for fluid for hydration, they will take back only the water by drinking water. So you end up with a net loss of salts, and this usually results in things like cramps and all these muscle fasciculations. So that's also something to take note of in terms of what happens when there is heat in the body.
All right. Now, kindly share some tips with our athletes and everybody that's working out in this hot season as to what they can look out for.
Okay, so emanating from my previous point, number one is that when you train in hot weather, you are not only supposed to replace by the fluid that you lose by drinking water. You're actually supposed to replace the ions, the salts as well that you lose. Meaning, instead of just drinking water, you must also consider replenishing yourself with electrolytes, and electrolyte drinks like Powerade, Energed, and all these similar drinks, so that you don't only replace the water, you replace everything that you lose when you sweat, when you work out. That's number one. Number two, to also ensure that you stay within the normal body temperature ranges. If you only have to train in the afternoon when it's hot, you have to make sure that before each workout, you actually go through a preparatory session like an ice bath or some cooling bath. And if after the training, you also have to consider again cooling off, either by taking a cold shower or doing an ice bath, so that the muscles don't have to stay too hot for too long, because all these physiological changes do happen with that. And also, of course, in terms of the recovery itself, after every intense training in this kind of weather, you need to also make sure you take enough protein, whether in the form of recommended supplements or the normal dietary supplements, like with meat, with peas, with all these nutrients that give you the ability to replenish and to repair your muscles that might have been injured. So it goes number one on diet, number two on recovery session and preparation and cooling off. And if possible, if it's very intense training, in terms of the hydration, you replace the fluids with the electrolytes, just to make sure that you don't sustain iron imbalances during training. If all this is not possible, you then rather want to train at times where it's a bit cooler, like towards the evening or early morning and not midday, just to make sure that you don't lose too much of your ions and the salt, and then maybe sustain muscle injuries during the day.
All right. While we are on tips, kindly give us some tips as to how athletes can avoid injuries and just a few recovery methods also during this heat.
Okay, so it goes without saying that one of the most important things for any athlete, for any sports person, is to make sure that they warm up properly before any bout of intense training. That's number one. So stretching ensures that when the muscle is now working out, it doesn't sustain sudden pulls or sudden strains that may result into tears. So the stretching must be emphasized, and it must be um, emphasized also that the stretching itself, a very effective stretching session, should take between 10 and 15 minutes. And after that, the period between the end of the stretching or the warm up and the actual exercise should also be within the next 15 minutes, because otherwise you lose that whole effect if you maybe wait too long before you start with the training. So that's about stretches. Then in terms of the training itself, for whatever activity or sports that you'll be doing, it's better to gradually increase your intensity. So if you have workouts that you do, start with the lightest, then you start to increase the intensity. That just gives the body time to adapt into the training. If you start with the hardest, you have higher chance of pulling your muscles too hard, or maybe sustaining something that the body won't be able to cope with. So when it's what were the training, you've got to manage your intensity. Then you also have to manage the sequencing of your training in terms of the length of time that you do before taking a break. Within a 10, 15 minutes or at intervals, you must be able to take like a cooling break, refuel in between, and not work like 30 minutes continuous, because that also accumulates. So those are some of the things to just include within the training sessions. Quick breaks in between, the stretching and the warm-up, adequate warm-up.
All right. Mr. Chinyama, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure. Thank you as well.
All right.